Greetings to the dear adjudicators. For today, I am here to oppose against the motion that this House would require political and candidates to pass a political competency test in order to run for office. I will start by rebutting most of the statements that have been mentioned by the proposition first, like saying that this test is like how most people would have a driver's license, so that they go through a driver's test. Well, driving is considered as a technical skill, whereas leadership to a country requires moral, emotional, and social responsibility. A governor also needs empathy and vision, not just knowledge. So choosing leaders just through a test can ruin the spirit of democracy. And then there's also political nihilism. And by using this policy, it can reduce that as well as gaining the trust of people. Well, guess what? Political nihilism doesn't only come from lack of candidate credentials. No. It can also come from other issues such as corruption and unmet needs. And gaining the trust of people can also be harder because some can also be told as unqualified to represent their own struggles. So a test won't really fix poor medical health care, low wages, or other social issues. And a test can also support meritocracy of the politician. Well, actually, this test doesn't promote meritocracy, it actually promotes technocracy, as this test would always aim towards highly educated participants, which shows that political candidacy is heavily locked with knowledge, not through experience and commutative leaderships. And the history of a politician can also show how much impact they have made without any needs of formal educations in economics, social, as well as law. Now, there are a few things in mind that I want to prove towards this motion itself, and that I want to show that this policy undermines the proper values of democracy and leadership, such as participation and representation of the candidates. There are also other better methods to help with the unqualified leaders aside from using an academic test. Now, there are a few arguments that I want to say towards the proposition team itself. And how exactly does this test can bring more harm to the candidates as well as to people instead of bringing good benefits? Well, let's start off with the first statement in mind is that this kind of test can actually restrict the political candidacy. What do I mean by restricting the candidacy itself? Well, just by using only a political competency test can limit the number of political candidates that can actually become like the leaders of a politician or something. Because using only a test can only limit to candidates and only allow the entry for people that benefit highly from education, which means this can harm high-class or top-notch leaders with excellent leadership experiences but no academic knowledge. It can also harm to traditional leaders whose wisdom don't rely entirely on textbooks and instead can also rely on general knowledge such as street smarts instead of book smarts. And well as also to, let's say, minorities that actually lack the proper education due to inequality, which actually still exists now in the status quo. And speaking of inequality, this kind of test can actually worsen it can make inequality a lot more worse than it already has in the status quo, as this kind of test only benefits from people who rely entirely mostly on education. This means that this test is entirely been made for people that rely on money, time, and access to education. Sadly though, not everyone actually have those requirements. Therefore, it can actually increase inequality instead of help decreasing it. There are also better methods there are also better methods that can help to this that don't actually break democracy. A few examples of this includes like the public disclosure of the candidate's experience, making civic education a must or mandatory in public schools or even outside schools, as well as introducing performance-based reviews of the politicians that are planning to join. Now, just taking a look now at the status quo in the current era right now, and there's a thing in mind that everyone is allowed to run as a leader, to run as a president, as a government like that. Yes, everyone has the right to run as long as they have met the basic legal criteria, such as the age of becoming a political candidate, not from academic filters. They don't everyone can actually join in as long as if they meet the requirements, but those requirements don't always have to mean in the form of education or academics like that. And yes, even though that in the status quo that we are still facing off against poor policy making, like how Trump has decided to increase most of the tariffs to most of the countries like China, as well as corruption, and a social issue that's still happening currently especially in countries like Indonesia. But you know what? It's not only elites who can actually have the rights to stop this. Voters or other people as well, especially to society, can help by rejecting incompetent candidates without needing to cause much more havoc, such as debate of the political candidates, as well as voting or to select much more better candidates that should be perfect to help lead a country itself. So what I'm trying to say about here is that an academic test doesn't always help when it comes to selecting political candidates. No. It doesn't always have to rely on education itself, but it can also rely on the experience of the politicians itself. Yes, some would always have the perfect legacies or actions that have shown them worthy to be leaders, but not everything has to rely on education and can also help through social empathy. That's why I oppose against this motion.